Brilliant. Okay, so as I was saying, Lisa Forsyth, Director of Max Associates, looking to chair this session. First of all, just a couple of housekeeping points. We are all virtual. I can't help you with your fire escapes, so any problems in your own house, you are just going to have to go and peg it yourselves, I'm afraid. However, ActiveNet have helped out with the refreshments. So I have got my Paddy's and Scott coffee. I hope you've got your, well, you can all be hiding whatever you want in your cups, but I hope you're all suitably refreshed. As you can see, we're back to the Zoom sort of platform. So any questions as we go on, we'll, if you can pop them into the chat, and we'll pick those up after we've had the initial sort of comments and introductions from our key panelists. So a year since lockdown, just over that, since we've all heard about coronavirus, and the world has changed considerably. Whilst it's impacted our families, our friends, and how we live our lives, what it has impacted considerably and will continue to do is that of our workforce. Whilst our workforce, you know, our people, they've had to deal with their lives, they've been furloughed, they've had considerable change in terms of what's happened to their families, they've changed job roles, a real difference has happened. So what we want to look at, I guess, is what support and what the role of our workforce is going to be going forward. And that's the discussions we're going to have today. Positively, I don't know if you've all seen the LeisureNet research that was undertaken in both lockdown 1 and lockdown 2, that absolutely said that the workforce, the support and the guidance that came from our workforce and facilities were one of the really strong elements that our members missed, and that's what's going to be needed going forward. So to help us discuss some of the issues today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our panelists. We have got Jenny Patrickson, who is MD of Active IQ. We've got Marcus Kingswell, who's Chief Exec of EMD UK. And we've got Tara Dillon, who's Chief Exec of SIMSPA. If you can all give a wave and say hello. Tara, thank you for hot-footing it from as it were, one room to another, as we think. So first of all, sorry, I'm just admitting a few people who are just coming, who are just joining us.
We've lost you, Lisa.
Lisa, you've muted yourself. Spacebar.
Brilliant. What we just want to consider is what is the role of our frontline staff and managers going forward. I think the keynote raised some really interesting themes. We talked about working outside our leisure centres, not just inside them. We talked about a place-based local proposition. And we also talked about the massive impact that digital has had on us. So first of all, I'm going to come to you, Marcus, and ask you, you are obviously as part of EMD representing Group X organisations and instructors. And what do you think the role and probably the challenge of our workforce is going to have going forward post-pandemic?
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here at ActiveNet again this year. I'm actually going to start with the customer and work back, because I think until we can get an idea of what the customer needs, the challenges for our workforce won't be clear. We're going to be living with COVID in this country for many months and probably years to come. And we've got an ongoing duty of care to make sure we look after our workforce and our customers, who will bring with them new hopes, fears, physical health problems, mental health problems, and the legacy of both COVID and lockdown. And I'm going to use that model just to help put some kind of sense onto the customer market now for a moment. If we can think of dividing the population into two. Those who have suffered through lockdown, which is pretty much everybody that's on this meeting today, and everyone in the country, I would say. We've all had our own personal challenges with lockdown. And then there's those who have suffered through COVID, or they're close to someone that has suffered through COVID. And they will have a very different outlook and perspective, and probably a different set of requirements when they come into our leisure centres, our gyms and our community venues. If we look for a minute at the COVID survivors, there's 4.3 million people in the UK have had COVID-19, That's 6% of the population, or 1 in 16. Now think of that in terms of a leisure centre or a gym. That might be an average of 1 person for each group exercise class that you're running. That means the instructors and the gym staff and the reception staff will need to tune into the needs of that person, which will be very different from the other 15 in the room. So we all need to be on our guard for that and make sure we are looking after people properly. And then turning to the lockdown survivors, which I've said is all of us. Now, we will naturally think of our own experience in lockdown and our own challenges we've come through and perhaps project those onto others. But I think we've all had unique experience depending on our backgrounds, where we live, our income, our personality types. So there'll be a whole range of different things that our staff will need to cope with in terms of dealing with those different needs and wants of their customers. I'll leave it at that for the time being, but there's just some background context for you.
Fabulous, thank you, Marcus. Jenny, moving on, I guess picking up on some of that, what are the skills, do you think, or is there going to be a change in skills and behaviours that our workforce is going to need going forward?
Yes, I think so. And first of all, hello. It's very nice to see some familiar faces and names on the screen. How we miss these events, and I'm longing for the next one face to face. But yes, I think the things that we would aspire for our workforce to have the knowledge, skills, and behaviours for actually is not that much different post-COVID to pre-COVID. We've known for a long time that we've wanted to exaggerate the work that we do on preparing the workforce in terms of their communication skills and the level of empathy that they need to be able to engage with people as true individuals. And if anything else, as Marcus has said, everybody will have had very unique experiences during the pandemic, despite us all being in the same situation. And for that, our workforce truly need that ability to communicate very effectively on a one-to-one basis and be aware and empathise with the very specific needs of those individuals. And as Marcus has said, not just from a physical perspective, but also from a mental health perspective, because I'm sure that all of us here know someone or have experienced ourselves mental health issues fairly significantly throughout the whole of lockdown. I know there are those people who say they've had wonderful lockdowns and have had fantastic times, but I think they are maybe blessed and have certain circumstances and that many people don't. So we need that uniqueness in our workforce to be able to adapt and work with individuals as individuals. So that's not really that different from what we would expect of them anyway, except that the problem's perhaps greater, certainly from a mental health perspective, certainly from a situation where we expect our fitness professionals to be able to work with people with long-term conditions. And whereas in the past, not perhaps all of our professionals were equipped and have been equipped to do that and have done CPD to do that, some have, some haven't. You know, we know in society there's a multitude of long-term conditions that affect people on a day-to-day basis, and that's a frontline fitness professional's day job, being able to deal with that. And of course now we have long COVID to add to that list. So being able to deal with those situations as well as mental health issues. And I don't know about everybody else here, but you know, from a physical health perspective and occupational health, anatomically, my body isn't quite the same after sitting in front of a screen for 12 months, or my eyes. So there's a lot of work to be done with everyone out there. So I think it's aspirations around the upskilling of our existing workforce, making sure our new workforce has those skills to deal with a broader range of issues. But I would say it's something that we've always aspired to, more reason than ever to make that happen now.
Thanks, Jenny. Tara, I was just looking to bring you in here because, you know, we've all seen that SimSpire has done a great hub of sort of bringing collaboration together of different parts of the workforce. What training needs have been sort of, you know, have they needed this over the last year. How's that changed and how do you see it moving forward?
Thanks, Lise. Good morning, everybody. I think I can probably couch it in three ways, Lisa, if I'm honest. The frontline workforce, I agree with Jen and Marcus. You know, broadening the skills set is essential. When you look at, I don't know how many people were on the keynote panel, we were looking at the future of local authority leisure and broadening our offer so that we adapt to local place-based systems approach, whole systems approach, and therefore we're going to need a different type of workforce. We can and upskill the existing brilliant talent we've got to be more community oriented in the sort of moving community sense, but also that's frontline. But we have a leadership challenge here too, and we need to really focus on where those opportunities are, because the type of leader needed post-pandemic and arguably pre-pandemic, what we talked about is what the pandemic has highlighted or perhaps exposed is some of the weaknesses that were already in existence. That now that may well be negotiating contracts with local authorities, it may be negotiating whole systems approach, and we're part of a solution as opposed to just a product on the high street, and therefore having a look at that holistically and saying what type of leader and potential leader are we going to need going forward to harness that sort of rich fabric that's available to us and make a more compelling story. And of course what comes with that is we're now focusing very much on society as a whole, and one of our key responsibilities going forward and what will make for a very compelling argument, Lise, is that we have a very important role to play in society's recovery. And what we cannot do is rest on our laurels and continue to, you know, issue a business out of a box and not increase visibility of a diverse workforce that represents those people that we really should be impacting. So that's the kind of in the future. I'd like to touch briefly on the mental health thing that Jenny alluded to. I'll put the link in the chat, but many of you will be aware. Thank you for actually looking at all the names on the screen. I think you probably know that we ran a mental health survey last month, and we had about 1,200 responses and over 80 employers contributing. And the headline stat is 53% of our workforce suffered with a mental health issue in the last 12 months, which is higher than the national average. And therefore we've got a responsibility as employers and deployers of our brilliant talent on whom everything hinges, really. As soon as people, you know, you saw the stats in LeisureNet, you know, a really high percentage of people cannot wait to come back to use our facilities, but poignantly because they want that one-to-one interaction with our instructors, our receptionists, our lifeguards, our kids activity coordinators, etc. We need to make sure that they are fit to be able to come back to work as well. So what I'll do is I'll put the research in the chat, and what we're supporting today and what we're announcing today is a pledge as a sector to protect our workforce against mental health challenges, and we're calling it the Good Work Pledge, and I'd encourage all of you to click on the link and have a look. And essentially what that does, it gives you an access to a sort of digital tool that enables to see as an employer how you fare in terms of managing mental health in the workplace and supporting your teams. The other third aspect, Lisa, is the reality of how tough it's going to be for operators coming out, because of course the restrictions are eased from the 12th of April, but the reality is there are still restrictions. So the limitations of reduced class sizes, sorry Marcus, May the 17th, and gym use and swim use, etc., means that we cannot bring all of our staff back. And there's a huge opportunity for our sector that we really must embrace collectively, and that's the use of apprenticeships. You know, apprenticeships are a fabulous opportunity for us going forward, and the apprenticeships that we developed, or you guys developed, the sector developed in particular, are available now. And I think what it does, it helps in terms of efficiency, but it also helps in terms of sort of diversity of delivery. So I think that they would be the three key themes. Leadership for me is a big one, Lisa. I think it's something that we really need to not tackle, but get right and improve on in the context of post-pandemic world.
Thanks, Tara. I think that's, yeah, really interesting. I want to touch upon all of those three where you talked about leadership. You also actually talked about a diverse workforce, which I think is really important. Obviously, mental health and, you know, from an operator's perspective. Maybe, Jenny, could you just pick up in terms of this going back to the apprenticeships, in terms of you know, how you've worked over the last year, the opportunities with apprenticeships, whether they're being, you know, our operators taking that opportunity. Be useful just to touch upon that in the first instance.
It's an interesting one for us. We had surprisingly, you know, an amazing year last year for apprenticeships. We're Active IQ is an endpoint assessment organisation for new style apprenticeship standards across a range of apprenticeships, about 15 apprenticeships. Sadly, the apprenticeships that did not do well were from our sector, understandably. Furlough leading to redundancies, pretty much everything went on hold from an apprenticeship perspective for our sector, and that's across the board. Very, very little was happening. Some signs of recovery in a few places, but it's fairly limited at the moment, and that's such a shame in terms of our sector, and those standards that were newly produced for the sector, newly created by trailblazer groups, hadn't really got off the ground that well anyway. They hadn't had time to, and then interrupted by COVID. The sectors for us that were very successful last year were out of sector. Sorry to just digress, but rail sector, customer service, team leader, supervisor, which of course is very, very generic and across the board, business admin, and teaching assistant, early years educator, things like that. So the positive for us to take from that is that apprenticeships and apprenticeship standards and the new style of endpoint assessment and the funding that applies to this whole new process can work very effectively and has been shown to do so, certainly out of sector. And what we can do from an Active IQ perspective, as and when gyms and facilities reopen, is apply those learnings from those other sectors, what's worked well, what hasn't worked, how to construct those programs more effectively to lead up to assessment, to then apply it to this sector. So we can certainly work collaboratively with our employers to get apprenticeships off the ground again, because as we've said, and as Tara said, they are still a massive opportunity for the sector. The funding is still guaranteed. There are greater incentives around apprenticeship uptake now for all sectors. And for, you know, for us, our industry in our recovery phase, I do think we need to embrace that.
Tara, yes, please jump in.
It's going to just, I mean, I expect most people know, just in case you don't, the leisure assistant apprenticeship is customer service, operations, health and safety, gym instructor, swimming instructor and lifeguard all rolled into one. You know, now when I was in ops, I'd be snapping people's arm off for that apprenticeship, because it's just it's a fabulous apprenticeship. So there's funding available, it's in-house, we wrote it as a sector together. You think about the efficiencies and efficacy that we're going to have to find going forward to employ. There's something about the apprenticeship concept as well. It's not just the fact that you've got all of those qualifications rolled into the apprenticeship, which on its own is fantastic. You know, we're actually going back, aren't we, Lisa? You go back, and Jenny, remember this. You know, that's what I did. I had all of those quals when I was a recce, because my manager, Pete Mills, is not on the call, was a bit tight with his money. So, you know, he sort of asked me to do everything within the hourly rate, and that's obviously moved on. But, you know, but for me as an individual, that was me hooked in this sector, because my role was so interesting and so diverse. And therefore, for us to consider, you know, that for me, that's just a very straightforward. There's a leisure duty manager, there's community health activators, you know, so all of the things that we were touching on in the keynote, those apprenticeships are available. So, and I think, you know, we did perhaps need to do a bit of myth busting. Jen and I talked about this a year or two ago, about this myth that, you know, unless you have access to the apprenticeship levy, you can't run apprenticeships. That's not so at all. You know, essentially the apprenticeship levy picks up kind of 9/10 of the bill. So yeah, I just think it's a huge opportunity, Lisa, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knew it existed.
No, I think, as you say, going back to having, you know, funding as well for operators, it's really good to know that that's available. Just picking up on something I think is really interesting in terms of having a diverse workforce. I think two of the things that came out of the keynote, you know, one, are we attracting the same people we've always attracted, and why aren't we able to attract those that are probably less active? And I guess in terms of diverse, you know, if our workforce doesn't reflect the communities we live in, how are we going to expect those people to engage? Marcus, are you able just to pick up from your perspective in terms of how we as a sector can encourage a more sort of diverse workforce to be part of the team?
Yeah, sure, Lisa. I think the first point, the one that you made, is absolutely right. We need people who are in responsible positions within leisure and the fitness sector to actually represent the communities from which they come from, and that provides a welcoming and accessible environment for participants. One of the things that we've been working on over the years is our Stand at the Front campaign, which is for people that have been participants for years in a fitness class to actually take the plunge and get themselves qualified and make that transition over to becoming an instructor. So that it's actually, the transition is from participant to that instructor level. However, when you look at the figures across the whole sector, there really is a lack of diversity. We tend to be attracting the same kinds of people. So I think what we've got to do, well, redouble our efforts first and foremost. We've got to take advantage, if you like, of the current mood around this publicly, which is that people want to see more diversity. They're looking for employers to step up and to improve their recruitment and retention techniques. And to reach out to those communities that really perhaps aren't represented amongst their workforce currently. So the challenge remains the same, but more important. But take this also as an opportunity. You know, we are in a position where we are recovering and reinventing. Let's take this change, this threshold, as a chance to broaden the diversity of our workforce and improve our recruitment and retention practices.
Thanks, Marcus. I think that's really some real truths in there. Jenny, Tara, is there any points that you wanted to add there in terms of trying to encourage a more diverse workforce? Jenny, please go.
Interestingly, I can see Julian on the call, and I will reference him in this. You know, for years before COVID, we've looked at ways of engaging with individuals and communities outside of the gym. We all know that the gym and facilities are only one mechanism, a really important mechanism, but one pathway to physical fitness, mental health, good mental health, community engagement. But we know that there has always been those opportunities outside of the gym. And what Marcus has talked about, you know, getting those in the community to step forward and be those people to engage with their peers was always the model that had been explored and proved to be successful around community activation. And Tara's obviously talked about there's an apprenticeship in that area as well, community activator coach. But years ago, Julian, this was before my time of joining Active IQ, developed a promoting community health and wellbeing qualification. The organisation I came from previously had a community activator qualification. And, you know, they were never, you know, excuse the word, but they were never sexy enough for people to pick them up and run with them. And for that to become a specific job role that has a place in our workforce and our sector. Well, we've looked at what's happened over the last year. Facilities being closed, people have embraced the great outdoors. They don't necessarily want to do that alone. People have embraced online coaching. Again, it might be something that they turn to moving forward more full-time, but they may not want that as a long-term solution. But what we know, and from the LeisureNet survey as well, where, you know, nearly 54% people said what they missed most was the motivation from their instructors, from their Group X instructors and their gym instructors, is the motivation and the support and the guidance. And we know that people need people, and in terms of diversity, people respond more effectively to those people that they can relate to. So if ever there was a place for a new job role or an expansion of the job roles, the diversity of the job roles that we already have in the sector, it's using those great staff that we have, bringing them back and using them outside of the walls of the facility, in the outdoors, online, in the facility, in different ways, but trying to work on the diverse nature of the roles and the diverse nature of people, and working with peers to, you know, really promote community activation.
Thanks, Jenny. So I think our challenge here is to come up with a job title that we all actually think will fit that role, because it's such an important one. And I think a lot of local authorities have been, you know, through the COVID response, where they've been setting up community hubs, voluntary groups, it's almost linking in with those same networks to try and sort of extend those into sort of physical activity into communities and local areas. So no, that's great. I think just before we open it up to the floor, one area that I know everybody in the last sort of 12 months has got very excited about is this combination or dual offer of both digital offer and centre-based offer. And I'm just interested in terms of a couple of things from the panel, whether we think that's something that's here to stay, and then how are we going to provide the skills for our staff to be able to deliver both ways around, really. I guess, Marcus, this is a one coming your direction to start off with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think digital will continue and will grow. And obviously, during lockdown, it's been the only choice. So naturally, people have flocked to it. Curiously, though, during January, February, March, the numbers have been falling off on online classes. I guess people have just had it up to here with the whole thing and thinking, actually, I'll just rather tune into Netflix, which is another sort of challenge from us. But going forward, I think we've got to take the best bits of digital and take them forward. So the quality of the experience, now we can see how to do this stuff well and what stuff to leave behind. We also know this is reaching certain groups who, for them, lockdown is normal. What I mean for that is people with disabilities, people with long-term health conditions who are not able to leave their homes, parents and carers who have to stay in nearly all the time to look after children or elderly relatives or others in their family, people from particular groups who have specialist needs that can only really be met en masse on a virtual setup. I'll give you one example. I was talking to Deaf Sport UK, and they were saying to get a local class just for deaf people is very, very difficult to get off the ground. If you run it nationally across Zoom, then you've got a class with critical mass, and then you can get an instructor with all the right skills to lead that class. So I think there's a massive point here about including people much more, reaching out to communities who have previously found leisure centres and gyms inaccessible and will continue to do so. But of course, there are barriers we need to overcome here about the digital divide, who has access to the right technology to make this happen, and of course all the practical things about doing this within somebody's home. So I see it very much as part of the future, alongside a centre-based offering, but perhaps with a more targeted approach than it's been in the past.
Really interesting. I think, as you said, the opportunities there, Marcus, are huge. Tara, Jenny, either of you want to come in with anything? Tara, yes, please.
Just quickly on 2 points, Lisa. Just going back to you know, this creating this job role. I think we do, and I, you know, looking to Carl's point in the chat and something that I mentioned in the keynote is that the leadership piece is is not limited to me as a deliverer, as an operator. It's around this whole systems approach, and that, you know, a lot of these roles already exist. So go into your locality, there is an active partnership. And active partnerships have hundreds of community activators who are well placed and well connected to take the product, the service that we offer out into the community and back. The other thing is that 85% of the population don't use our facilities or our boxes for a variety of reasons that we could talk about all day. And therefore, thinking more creatively about that delivery and through a different medium, which may be through a health commissioner, it may be through a local workplace, it may be through the local college, through the local school, etc. But infiltrating and becoming part of the DNA of a locality is absolutely where the workforce can have the greatest impact. So we don't necessarily need to recreate roles, we just need to work better in collaboration with our partnerships in the locality. And then just on the digital marketing piece, I think I can say this, I'll probably get shot for saying this, but we've just done a piece of work with Sport England where, in terms of digital marketing skills, I'm not just talking about delivering a class online, I'm talking about enhancing your digital marketing understanding as an individual, as a local sports club, as an SME, harnessing the power of digital marketing and using it for positive outreach is a skill in its own right. And we've just secured a significant amount of funding for Sport England to now develop for the next year digital marketing learning, a sort of skills platform that will be available to everybody. You know, it will be a free service. So absolutely delighted to be able to announce that. And I'll probably get shot because I'm not sure I could announce it. You're a board member, Lisa, I haven't told you yet. Consider yourself updated. The other area as well, which is fairly significant, is a lot of you will have seen that we managed to inject £2 million back into the sector for training, for essential training. Some of that was the Reactivate Fund, which enabled people to be COVID secure, COVID ready, and return to opening facilities, but also, you know, essential training such as lifeguards, first aid, swimming teachers, fitness instructors, etc. Members of SIMSPA, employer partners of SIMSPA, UK Active and CL UK were able to access a pot of money. So you would identify your training needs and then we would pick up the bill. I'm also delighted to announce that we're going to extend a version of that going forward over the next year. It'll start in summer. But one of my biggest concerns has been around the circa 10% of the workforce that we've lost, and hemorrhaging the talent that we've had for years, simply because, I mean, who's in front of my screen? I can see Kevin Lane and Andy King, right? So they are Kevin sat in the mountains. So two operators who would love to keep and retain all this talent, but due to the restrictions, we'll have to ease people back in, and understandably people will leave. Now, we've again been able to secure a pot of money from Sport England, a significant pot of money, working with partners at EMD and UK Coaching. That means that we can stay in contact with those individuals, keep them up to date, keep them trained, help them develop CVs and interview techniques and goal setting, and create a network of alumni, if you like, of people who were in our sector that we want to keep in our sector. So when Andy and Kevin are now saying, okay, I'm ready to recruit again, I can have 100% of my capacity back, we go back to that original brilliant cohort, as opposed to having to go out and recruit massive, you know, en masse, and retrain. So two brilliant announcements I'm delighted to be able to share with you, and all credit to Sport England, who are investing massively into our recovery.
Thanks, Tara. I think that's a real good point there in terms of the investment that we're through SIMSPA is hoping to go back into the workforce in terms of the talent there, which I think is really positive. Jenny, did you want to add anything in, or are you?
Just briefly, and just picking up on the digital online element as well in terms of coaching, and also funding and SIMSPA related. So we're looking at the role of the workforce post-pandemic, and what we need to make sure that we do is not think this is just going to go back to normal and here are the job roles, and those job roles are still fit for purpose. And yes, we can use them more creatively if we try, but there's something more to be done from this. If we need a legacy, we should have a legacy from this period of time, which is, you know, looking at occupational standards afresh, looking at, and this is the role for all of us, because whilst Tara and SIMSPA might, you know, be the caretakers of that, this is us, all of us in the room who feed into this. What is it that our organisations need now in terms of workforce skills, knowledge, behaviours? What are the different roles that exist, should exist coming out of this? What can we learn from those who have adapted during this last 12 months, whether it's to the outdoors in their coaching or to online in their engagement with others. I really think we need to look at those occupational standards, and I would hope that funding from Sport England and workforce development would help towards that, because we've got to secure the future of our workforce and make sure it is fit for purpose. And of course, then for the rest of us, from a qualifications perspective, they come from occupational standards, training providers, they deliver what comes out of that. It's all cascaded down. So it's let's look ahead and not backwards. So just going back to where we were.
Brilliant, thanks Jenny. Had some questions coming in through the chat box. Andy King, did you want to put your question to the panel?
Yeah, happy to do so, Lisa. It was simply around the system change, and Tara mentioned it in the keynote address earlier on, about the ecosystem really, and how we work together with other parts of the system. And Tara knows my thoughts on this, I think, but it's a question to, do we have the right skills at the moment and the knowledge to work within that ecosystem in the current climate? And if not, what could we do about it in the fairly sort of urgent period of time we've got in front of us?
Who wants to take up that point from the panel?
Well, Lisa, I'll happily take it, because Andy and I have had numerous exchanges on this subject over the last year. I just want to myth bust. I mean, I don't know how many people were on the keynote. So systems thinking is a phrase that's being bandied about, that people have a tendency to overcomplicate. It's not a complex approach, systems thinking. It's fairly obvious. And if you were to just consider where we were and where we have been for the last decade, you can draw your own conclusions on where you are in systems approach. So let me just read this out to you. I wrote this down last night. So it's simply put, systems thinking is an approach to integration that's based on the belief that the component parts of a system, right? So local authority, local health commissioner, active partnership, local, etc., us. So believe that the component parts of a system will act differently when isolated from the system's environment and other parts of the system. So the reason I say you can draw your own conclusions, if we have been operating in isolation and providing a fantastic service to those who can access it, let's be frank, those who can afford it, and then we talk about our success in terms of social value and measurement of social value, we're actually in our own echo chamber. We're actually only reporting on how well we've done for those who can. Being part of a whole system and not trying to be the whole solution, but part of the solution, is where the power and the compelling story this sector truly needs comes from. So going back to Andy's question, do we have the skills? I honestly think we do, Andy. What we probably need to do is harness good practice where it exists and share it, as opposed to, would I need to retrain if I were back in ops and I was running GM or I was running Active Nation? Would I now be thinking, right, okay, well, I need a completely different skill set in order to have a conversation with health commissioners or the local authority, or renegotiating my contract, or asking where the pinch points are? You know, we heard this earlier this morning from Kevin and from Debbie, that, you know, times are going to be tough. 94% of local authorities have got significant cuts ahead of them. 7.5% are close to going bust themselves. We can help. You know, we are part of that solution. We're not the entire solution. So I think we do have the skill set. I certainly think we have the will and the enthusiasm. I know Carl's on this call somewhere, and I'm pretty sure he'll have an opinion on this. It's not everywhere, but it doesn't mean to say we can't share good practice. You know, you're a great example, GM. You know, the collection of 13 trusts and your local active partnership and support from the local authorities in GM is so powerful, Andy. And what we need is for you to write down the to-do list, how to do this, and then I go and share it with Kevin and co, and so it grows. And from there we develop occupations. You said this particular role worked, this particular leadership style works. You know, we've got people like, I can see, you know, so many people on this call with significant areas of expert. Rich Millard could tell us how to negotiate with local authorities. Carl Bennett can talk to you about how to negotiate with health commissioners. Carl said to me a few years ago, this is so simple, we're stupid. He said the health commissioners set out their outcomes for the next 3 years. You can read it on a JV something or other, he told me. You can then look at your offer, go back to the health commissioner and say, this is our contribution to that, which will generate X saving of and Y bottlenecks. What's not compelling about that story? Then you go back to the kind of political question, and why have we failed, which I struggle with a bit. I'm not sure we completely failed. Why are we misunderstood by government? Because we tell our own story in the way that we want it to be heard, instead of having the genuine impact on local delivery that we can have. So yes, I mean, when you put it like that, obviously I'm not in ops anymore, it strikes me that it would come across as patently obvious. Do we need to develop a new skill set for that? No. Can we harness good practice and share it? Yes. Is that a skill in its own right? Is that just personal development? Yes, I think so, Andy. Happy for you to bash me back on that.
What I was going to do, because you've mentioned Carl twice there, Tara, and he has got a question in the chat, which maybe just focuses a little bit more or picks up on your point about leadership. Carl, did you want to put that to the panel?
Got my video on. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello. Yeah. I just want the challenge is much broader than those that work at the coalface, interacting with customers directly, and I believe that until we have very good knowledge and a cohesive knowledge of chief execs, local politicians, those that manage local finances, and then how they link to those local systems in relation to health commissioning, and that's across social care as well as education, has to be said. I'm not sure what we're doing as a I don't like the term, but it's the only term I can use. I'm not sure what we're doing to ensure that those wider individuals are on board.
Thanks, Carl. Did everybody hear that? I think Carl came a little bit across, a bit Dalek-y there, but it's I suppose it's the question as in the chat box, you know, do the wider stakeholders understand our role and what we're contributing to their outcomes to a certain extent? Anybody on the panel that wants to pick that up specifically?
My answer is just short and sweet, but I don't think they do. Otherwise, we would have made more progress. Despite, you know, the massive amount of lobbying by our sector throughout the last year, and the, you know, extensive work you can see that's been done in that area, not for lack of trying. It's obvious that politicians still don't get it. The importance of our sector as a preventative mechanism against any illness is clearly something, and we've said this so many times, and so I'll just make this short, but there is still an ongoing piece of work by the stakeholders within our sector to educate those individuals and groups that Carl has referenced, amongst others, to be just bang the drum about what we are doing and what our various roles are, and perhaps there need to be more voices around the table doing that to actually have even more success, but we just need to keep doing that. I've seen Liz on the call, and you know, Liz has been on a mission, obviously for all of us as well, to get our voices heard by Parliament, and clearly they're still not listening as much as they should, and it's because I don't think that they understand it still. So there's still a job of work to be done. Sorry, I can't be more positive with that answer.
And I guess it comes back to, is there either we need to change our story, going back to what Tara suggested, you know, in terms of Carl's point, or is there an education piece that we need to do from our sector to those who understand what we're actually delivering?
Elise, if I just jump in there and just add a bit of positivity, it has been difficult. The lobbying piece has been tough, but I will talk this up a little bit. There's two things that have struck me, particularly in the last, well, throughout the pandemic and lockdown. The obvious one is I heard 4 messages every day. You know, stay in, protect the NHS, save lives, and go and do some exercise every day. Well, that's not a bad thing. So, you know, talk about baked in the consciousness of society, and people have found ways to do that. And we've all got stories where we're seeing people I've never seen before in my village going for, you know, hearty, healthy walks every day. And, you know, I'm sort of cheerleading because it's great news. But the other side of it is, and I mentioned this in the keynote, there is a tendency, particularly at number 10, as opposed to cabinet, to sort of couch our sector under the auspices of 4 or 5 high-profile sports. And also there's a risk that, you know, the stuff of local authority leisure is just that. It's something that the local authority does, and therefore it's well catered for. I have to say, in the last 3 or 4 months, I see a real shift. I really do. You know, we have challenges in government. We have challenges with the department that we report into. DCMS is not a strong department. That's the reality of it. It doesn't have as much influence as perhaps, well, obviously the Treasury or MHCLG does. However, we have made massive inroads, I would say. And, you know, Liz's petition was brilliant because it was on top of a zillion conversations that Sporting and Simsbury UK Active have been having. The other powerful thing that's changed this year, to give you all some hope, is we work collaboratively. One of the issues we've had over the years, and we've all gone in separately and made our case to DCMS and created a lot of noise as opposed to a lot of progress, if I'm going to be uber critical of us. And I'm, you know, delighted to say that we've been coalescing around 1 or 2 single poignant areas that can significantly impact us. Things like the NLRF as an example, but more widely profile for the sector. And that is working. I can tell you that categorically, that is making a significant difference.
Perfect. Thanks, Tara, on that. I'm just going to pop back to the chat. Liz, you've got a couple of questions in there. Did you want to address those to the panel?
Hang on a sec. Phone. Let me just see if I can turn myself on, so to speak. I can't seem to start my camera.
We can hear you, Liz.
We can hear you.
Yeah, have you blocked? I don't know if you've blocked my camera. Anyway, that's okay. Yes, which of my points would you like me to pick up? I just sent one through to Tara about the suggestion that maybe we should be lobbying to have a dual portfolio set up in government, because as you say, DCMS possibly doesn't have the teeth that we need. And the hospitality sector has an interesting setup where they're looked after by the Department for Business and the DCMS. And obviously they've achieved a lot of great things in terms of access to Treasury with the VAT relief and that kind of thing that we're chasing after. I just wonder if there's a future for us in that area, because it seems that the government doesn't really understand the business of activity in terms of its contribution to the economy, not just the operations that happen and the businesses that work within this sector, but the impact of the economy on the economy of having a fit workforce, and how important it is. You know, a sluggish workforce is not going to drive post-Brexit Britain. So I really feel that there's an argument there for us having, you know, some kind of link to the Department for Business. And in terms of the people aspect of the industry, I think that's really important. I just value your views on that. And then there was the other thing I was asking about whether we need to start ramping up our staff almost as enforcers of safe COVID behaviour within our facilities. Because as we've seen in Hong Kong, you only have to have one rogue operator to potentially bring the whole sector down. And I think most people are seeing the staff as being in the front line of this and being the gatekeepers of COVID secure behaviour within gyms. And, you know, are they going to feel confident in challenging members if they're not wearing masks, or in challenging members if they're not socially distancing? Can we give them the skills fairly quickly to enable them to help us to make sure that we can operate safely as we come out of lockdown? So those were the two things that I put on the chat.
Thanks, Liz. I'm just conscious of time, so maybe a brief couple of comments from each of our panelists. Marcus, did you have? I could see you responding positively there to Liz's comments.
Thank you, Liz. I'll respond to the second question. The one is the first isn't really one probably for the other people on the panel, but I totally agree. This is absolutely a role for our workforce to enforce the COVID practices and safety. This week we've just issued our group exercise roadmap for group exercise instructors, which sets out the different things they need to do at each of the 4 steps of the government's plan. Very practical terms, and a lot of this is around maintaining the safety of their participants and making sure they're talking to them, supporting them, understanding their needs. So this is critical stuff. And of course, the workforce is already in an authority position in some respects. If you're leading a class, the participants are looking to you for guidance and for expertise on the exercise routine. And it follows very simply to give guidance on other aspects of health and safety in the same way you would expect them to talk, point out fire escapes or ask if anybody's got an injury and all those sorts of things. So I think that's absolutely there. What's incumbent on us or on the management is to make sure this is really emphasised to everybody that works in our sector. Everyone's got a customer facing role, that they need to be helpful, supportive and empathetic to participants, but also if there are transgressions, really to intervene. That's absolutely part of it, and they're right and proper to do so, because as you rightly point out, Liz, it only takes one person who's maybe has brought in a COVID germ into the facility, which could be really quite catastrophic if they're not managed correctly. So yeah, absolutely, that's a role for the frontline staff.
Jenny, did you have any comments on those?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Marcus, and we know that there's training out there for individuals and operators in terms of making facilities COVID secure. So I won't go into that. Really, when you look at it from a training perspective for the workforce, people coming into the sector or those that are already in the sector, it is that encouragement, not just encouragement, but perhaps the enforcement of CPD in those areas that management need to be mindful of. But I'd pick up on the point that Liz made and Marcus has said as well. It's not just about health and safety, it's about dealing with individuals. And a lot of that is conflict management, isn't it? You only have to, out on the street, see the different extreme views of people. I can be running and I can outside and avoid people and they'll stand miles back, and there's those that don't really mind and they're just there. Those views and behaviours in a facility are going to be so diverse, and things are probably going to kick off at times, and our poor frontline staff, whoever they may be, are going to have to deal with those situations and may not be equipped to deal with those situations. So another area for that continual learning, continual development, dealing with individuals, dealing with conflict resolution, etc. We need to help our staff. We can see how much they're valued from the LeisureNet report, and we need to invest in them and help them.
Thanks, Jenny. Tara, did you have any comments on those points made by Liz?
Yeah, just to pick up on that last point Jenny made. The Reactivate platform was funded by Sport England so operators could access it. 25,000 people have accessed the training so far. It went live in June. On it, as Jen quite rightly pointed out, our modules around conflict management, about queue management. They're in there. I wouldn't stop there. By the way, I wouldn't just rely on an online module to understand that I have the right behaviours to manage that. I would be speaking to my staff right now and making sure that they feel confident to do it. I think pretty certain if Woody's on the call, he'll tell you it needs to be face to face. But just to the second point that Liz made, absolutely 100% agree with you, Liz. And there's some real progress there. So one of the limitations of working with a relatively weak government department on DCMS is that, you know, you're sort of stymied by their limitations, and therefore if you're one voice of a massive portfolio, it's not a great place to be. So yes, there is work going on to make sure that we in equal measure lobby BEIS, MLCLG and the Cabinet Office. And there's a group now called the National Sectors Partner Group, which is Sport England, Active Partnerships, YST, SRA, UK Active SIMSPA, LGA, and the Sport for Development Coalition. And we're coming together to do two things. One is to make sure that we speak with one voice as a sector and that we're representative of the entire sector. And the second one is to make sure that when government, this is your point in hospitality, Liz, is that hospitality has a group like that. So when somebody in government, irrespective of the department, says, I wonder where I should be, who I should be asking this question, they always go to this lobby group in hospitality, which is why they have seen some of the successes they have. So we've created this group too. Sport England are an advisor on it because they're arm's length and therefore can't be seen to be too antagonistic, but the rest of us can. So there's some real progress there. I'm delighted to be able to share.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Tara. Just looking at the time, it is 11:31. I think we need to be drawing this session to a close. I would absolutely like to say thank you very much to the panelists who took the time to be put up front to offer their views and their what's happened in the sector for the last year. Thank you very much in terms of everybody listening in. I think we use this opportunity to absolutely recognise the value of the workforce, the challenges they've undergone in the past year, and what they will have going forward as the leisure centres and facilities reopen. But I think, as Tara's pointed out and others, there's some real opportunity insofar as, exercise is something that's really, as we've said, baked into people's consciousness now. It's an opportunity to take forward, and hopefully with some of the collaborations that have been working in the industry, we can use those in terms of funding going forward to really make sure those finances are there. But we all recognise the challenges. So thanks ever so much, everybody. I think we've got a breakout session now, so I know there are some further questions from Tracy and Paul. Sorry we didn't get there, but we can maybe use the networking sessions going forward. You can go into the networking rooms, and then from 11:50 I think the one-to-one meetings take place from there, so hopefully to see some of you all in those. Finally, thanks ever so much, everybody, and I apologise, panellists, you can't hear the applause that's sounding out from the floor through the